Right, bear with me here. We have a finished door, but I need to apply the paint coat to it. And I think I've given myself a bit of a challenge because you can see the different color in the MDF here. That's because this is nice fresh MDF and this is some MDF that's been lying against the workshop wall for a bit too long. And I could tell when I chiseled out the hinges, it's beginning to get a little bit loose and a little bit fluffy. So definitely going to be a challenge to paint, but hey-ho, it's meant to be an experiment, and if I can get a good result out of this, then I know I've got a good technique going forwards. Now, I've done quite a bit of research on this, and I've also painted a good bit of MDF myself, and so I know that painting the main surface here is easy. No matter what kind of MDF you have or what kind of paint you have, you can't go wrong with it. It's on the edges that you're going to have challenges, and the problems you'll find is if you put paint directly onto the surface, it will just suck it in. You'll have to put on far too many coats, and which never leaves a very good finish on the top when you have to put so many on the edges. Also, the edges can quite easily have a very poor surface finish. And the third thing, which most people aren't aware of, is that over time the MDF colour can start to show through, leaving you with a horrible yellow border to your nice piece. So what are we going to do to get the perfect finish here?
Right, okay, before I go any further, let's just stop here for a moment. I need to give you a little insight into what I was thinking at this time when I was filming this section, and that's that this part of painting the door was just going to be a small section within the door build video where I say this is the best way to paint MDF. But as I started to go through the process, I started to question myself and say, is this really the easiest way to get the best results? To get the answer to that question, I needed to do some experimentation, but in the process of me transitioning from a this is how you do it video to an experimentation video, the story gets a bit confused. So instead what I'm going to do is a voiceover over the top of those clips so that you can see what I was doing and the process that I followed. The first thing to understand is that MDF, particularly on the edges, needs to have some kind of sealer or primer applied to prevent those problems I discussed earlier. There are three coatings that we need to consider. There's the paint, which will be the final coat, but there's also MDF Sealer and/or MDF Primer. For the door, I went for 2 coats of sealer, 2 coats of primer, and then 2 coats of paint. And we also gave it a light sand after the sealer and primer coat, which ensures that we have a really smooth surface to paint on top of. A spoiler, this does give great results, but the big question was, it's a lot of work and is it necessary? To answer that question, I then did a sample with paint only that we could use as a benchmark. I then did a third sample with sealer, a light sand and then paint, and a fourth sample with primer, a light sand and then paint. My expectation at the time was that the sealer and primer would both give us great results, but the sealer is much easier to apply and it's much cheaper, and all the marketing material tells me it's just as good as primer, so I was really hoping it would perform well. What I found in practice was that the MDF sealer did go on very nicely, but as you'd expect, it did lift the fibres and it needed a light sand, but no matter how light I sanded it, it seemed to take off a good portion of that sealer layer. The primer, on the other hand, is a thicker product, which makes it ever so slightly less easy to apply, but it is still an easy product to apply and it leaves a much thicker, more complete coating. When sanded down, it becomes silky smooth and it's a very nice starting point. Moving on to painting, we unhelpfully had a last-minute change of heart and decided to paint the doors white, which unfortunately isn't the best to illustrate what's happening on camera. What we did do is paint the door and all the panels with 2 good coats of satin wood paint. One tip here is that a fluffy roller will give a slightly textured finish, while a foam roller will give you a smoother finish.
That's now everything painted, the door and all the sample pieces, and I thought before peeling off the masking tape, I've lost track of which one is which, so I thought I had a good opportunity to do a blind test and see which one I think is the best and worst finish. So if I lie them all side by side, so looking at the top one here, the surface finish it's a little bit better on the door, but it's pretty good, and we've got good coverage on the edges, although it's slightly on the rough side. On the door, it's a nice smooth finish. You can see the seam still, but otherwise it's a good smooth finish, and it actually feels very much like the top surface. But already I think that's going to be my second best. The door's going to be the best. Between these two, so both the edges are really rough. And this one here, I think the MDF is showing through a little bit more. Yeah, it's a little bit patchy on the edges. The top is quite rough. And this one, the top is actually, the MDF color showing through. So I think that's the worst. Worst on the top, best on the bottom. In last place we have Paint and Sealer. That's surprising. We have paint only. That's the obvious one I thought for the second place, but sorry, I thought that was going to be worst. Second place we have paint and primer. Let's do this. Fourth, third, second, and first. Now, looking at these a bit closer, I think we've clearly got two camps. This pair is at the bottom end of the spectrum, whereas this pair is at the top end of the spectrum. And I have to admit that this coat here looks like it's maybe a thinner coat, and so maybe it's harsh to judge these side by side with this one disadvantaged. But really, I think it's semantics at this point. The top surface is pretty rough, better on this coat, the sealer, than with the pure paint, but the edges, they're both unacceptably rough, and the coverage, it's still showing MDF color through the edges. And I think although another coat of paint or another two coats of paint might solve the coverage issue, it's still going to be rough, and you're not going to be able to sand down the paint to get an acceptable finish there. So I'd say, without a shadow of doubt, they're failures, unacceptable. When I look at this pair, truthfully, it's very difficult for me to pick a first and second place. Now, I want the door to win because I put that much more effort into it, and I thought it was going to win. But truthfully, I really don't think I can say one is better than the other. So what do I conclude from all of this experiment? Well, first of all, I'm kind of disappointed to say that MDF Sealer doesn't seem to do anything from my experiments. Maybe it would prevent that yellow staining from coming through in time, but to get a good surface finish, you're going to have to use it in conjunction with primer anyway. So that will prevent the staining, and I can only conclude that Sealer doesn't do anything, which also explains why I can't pick between these two, because if you take Sealer out the equation, they've both just been primed and then painted, and hence they're the same. I will say that if you want to go for the sort of eggshell look, go for a fluffy roller. If you want to go for a smooth look, go for a spray or foam roller. But yeah, they're both great results that I'm perfectly happy with. And my recommendation and what I'll be doing going forward is to use an acrylic primer on the main surface, 2 coats, 3 coats on the edges, a light sand to get rid of any rough points, and then 2 coats of wood paint, and you should be good. If you're interested, there's a link for the primer down below, and until next time, cheerio.